Hey, good morning. Welcome to Crosstalks, the Crosstalk podcast here at Eatonton First United Methodist Church. We are here and enjoying ourselves, and we thought we might just let you jump into with us. If you have any comments or questions about our topic, please feel free to post in the description down below, in whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'd love to hear from you. We got something that we had an idea about what we were going to talk about, but Joe Deloach and Brian Beveridge are here, and Joe came with a list that just kind of like an arrow across the bow, or I guess that would be like a torpedo across the bow would be the right metaphor. Just brought some real interesting information about church, institutional church, and the deeper issues that we have as an institution, as a part of the institutional church. So the Church of Jesus Christ is obviously one church. There are many institutions, many denominations, and many different ways of looking at church. But Joe, talk to us. What you got?
Well, one problem that I face as youth director is the lack of youth. Not only that, but I sit in church on Sunday morning and I look around, and I'm 72, and I'm about the average age of the person in the church. Where are the young adults going to church? The young adults with children and teenagers. And anyway, so yesterday, after I finished preparing the lesson for tomorrow, I had a few moments, and I did like a lot of people. I used Google. So I Googled it. I said, why are young people not attending church? They gave me 5 reasons, which I think are kind of interesting. Number 1, Google said, young people say, church is irrelevant. The young people are tired of hypocritical leaders who've experienced moral failure. You know, I thought, well, you look at all the scandals that go on in churches, I can understand that. I'm going to go through the list and we'll talk about it. Number 2, God is missing. That is something that really touches my heart, because I see a lot of churches, we call them at my house, feel-good churches. Let's feel good, let's have a good time, but there's never any mention of God and Christ. Number 3, legitimate doubt is prohibited. And see, that's something that I stress in youth. You need to question, because I think sometimes questioning strengthens your beliefs. Number 4, no one is learning about God. That breaks my heart. Right there. Right there. And number 5, the church is not providing a sense of community. You know, you'd think in 2021 we wouldn't need a sense of community. 200 years ago, the church was the community. It was a social organization for the community. Evidently, we still need that. So those are the 5 topics that they said that the reason young people stay out of church.
What was the first one?
The first one was church is irrelevant.
Church is irrelevant.
Leaders are hypocritical and have experienced moral failure. So let's start with that one.
Church is irrelevant?
Yeah, is church irrelevant? Young people will tell me on youth on Wednesday night, what does this have to do with the way I live every day? When we walk out of this door, what you're talking about, well, that's why I do things like tonight. We have done things like sometimes I gossip. Tonight I'm doing Life is Not Fair. I try to make it something they can take with us. So, is church irrelevant in today?
I mean, a lot of churches don't actually touch on life experiences for kids.
Not just kids, but people.
Well, I mean, for young adults, for teens, for the older generations, a lot of times, and it's nothing against the pastor, like our church actually hits on,
Sunday, David preached on courage. And I had a person in my office yesterday to tell me that was the best sermon she had ever heard.
See, then you have a lot of churches, though, and I've been to churches where they preach on, well, you don't spend enough money here, you don't, it's about money, because they don't know how to spend their money.
Or how many hairs Noah had on his head.
Right, or they get into the whole love your neighbor, but they don't tell you why to love your neighbor. And they don't get into the whole backlash of things that happen in the world.
If I was a child, and I used to be one, I would say church is pretty irrelevant when it comes to the conversation of God, and that sounds really harsh. And I'm not saying that I think this congregation does it a certain way, and the last congregation I went to does it a certain way. But as a child, I look back on my childhood as a little member of Canton First Baptist who used to go quite often to Canton First Methodist because my family was split down the middle. I had Baptist family, and grandmama was a Baptist, and Papa was a Methodist. And so guess what? I was a Baptist Methodist.
Baptist Methodist.
And I went both places. And so,
I've done that.
But I remember in hindsight, those teachers spending their time. It was a little old lady at both places, spending their time to really engender God to me and help me memorize scriptures and tell ideas. Now, Methodists did it a different way than Baptists, but either way, what I remember most, this is going to sound terrible, but what I remember most are ants on a log, celery, peanut butter, raisins. And honestly, that was pretty much that was the highlight of my Sunday school hour.
Oh, yeah.
But is church relevant? It didn't really make sense to me until I had some pretty supernatural experiences and began to understand that the Holy Spirit was real, and that there was a battle, a cosmic battle, if you will, beyond the senses between good and evil. I think for me, none of this was relevant until at some point in my late teens, and I was in youth. And by the way, youth for me was because I was motivated because my mother said, "You're going to youth," and there were other mothers that were in a network of mothers. The mothers network said, "We want our kids in youth." It wasn't the youth director, though I loved Jay Tenney, who's a pastor now, and he was a youth director then. I loved him, and I still do. But it was my mother telling me you're going to youth, and then at some point I had a girlfriend in youth.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. So for me, but as an adult, I didn't go to church until I was 26. Honestly, when I was in seminary, I didn't actually go to church regularly. It wasn't relevant to me, even in seminary. In my spirit, I didn't feel like I needed it. I had community at seminary, but it got real personal when the Bishop Davis, looked at me one day. I was in the library at Asbury Theological Seminary, and he said, "What church are you going to?" And I had just started helping lead worship at an Anglican church in Lexington, Kentucky. And he said, "Well, that's not a United Methodist church. Are you United Methodist?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if you're going to be a pastor in a United Methodist church, you need to start attending a United Methodist church." And so it became a lot more relevant. But even then, I went, and I don't mind saying it, I went to Wilmore United Methodist Church on Sunday morning, and I would go and lead worship at the Anglican church. The Methodist church wasn't relevant to me. I sat in the back, listened to organ, listened in this huge space that used to be filled by many, and it was filled by maybe 50 or 60 at that point, half of whom were seminarians, and it wasn't relevant to me. So did you think your pastor would say something like that?
No. But I
No,
actually...
that shows how human and real you are.
But I'm telling you, I don't know that we've gotten relevant. And it's relevant to me.
Well, it was.
But obviously there's somebody that's not
It
relevant.
was to me when I was growing up. Because first of all, we lived in the country, went to a very small church, and when I was littler, say before I hit double digits, I always confused God with mama and daddy. I knew that when God in the Bible said he would punish you, it was going to be daddy. I knew that.
I knew of a harsh God too.
And mama was the same. Well, of course, mama breathed fire just looking at you. But I oftentimes confused him. So God was real to me because, first of all, growing up in the country, not a whole lot of friends, no friends. And he was very real. He became real to me when I was about 13 or 14 at Rock Eagle at a, believe it or not, tri-highway, boy, that really shows my age, convention.
I know what tri-highway.
And he became very, very real. And then I'll think back when after I was married, I mean, any big decision I made, God and I talked about it. I laugh all the time. God is so real to me, I argue with him, just like I argue with my wife. Continually, you don't know what you're saying. No, God, you need to do this, you need to do that. But anyway, when our second child was born, and we didn't know whether she was going to live or die, and they had to operate on her when she was a couple of months old and put a shunt in her brain. And I watched them roll our child down the hall God was standing and Christ was right there by me. He was as real as this table and you and Brian are. So for me, I feel sorry for people that don't have that feeling. Now, so I would say the church, but I went to church because growing up, my mother said, you will go to church on
That's
Sunday.
exactly right.
She used to say, God gives you 6 days a week. You can give him an hour on Sunday. And we went,
And
period.
See, mine was the opposite. I didn't have anybody to actually guide me to church except for my grandmother. And that was only a part-time thing. It wasn't a full-time thing. But when I got to youth, I kind of got drew into church because I had a youth minister that rode up on a Harley
That would have got my attention.
and taught me, God uses broken people that are messed up that, that need that help, that need to be glued back together. That's why we come to church, is to get that. Church is a hospital.
That's right. It's a
At
good
its
way of putting
best.
it.
And that's what we should do, is heal the broken and not just, it's like the lost sheep, and that's one of the first lessons he taught. God tells us to go out and find that one lost sheep that's away from the herd. The 99 will stay together.
So if church is irrelevant, why is church irrelevant?
I don't think it addresses the needs. Well, for example, Sunday. Of course, everybody is aware of what's going on in the nation with Afghanistan and the politics. I think the
Pandemic.
most telling thing you said was, we've been here before. We've seen this before. I thought, to me, that was relevant. That is a problem in my life showing you that it's very relevant. And then you also said, it's on my wall now, God give me the courage to remember that I'm one of yours, that you have not deserted me.
Well, and speaking of memory, it is something that we tend to, in our society. I don't know if this has always been the case, but humans have an amazing way in the midst of crisis to sort of forget or bury the issues of the past. It's like, we're not going to talk about that anymore.
They want to erase it.
But memory is so important, and we start with the table, right? Do this in remembrance of me. So memory is like to understand we've been here before. God moved the people of Israel across the Red Sea. God brought them into the Promised Land. God has done this. He brought His Son. He sent His only Son. All these things we just sort of forget.
And see, I think to make God relevant, sermons need to be, if one thing that I've loved about it, of course it came when I got a little bit older, the Bible is full of plain, ordinary people. They're not, when I was growing up, you had the idea that they were all saints and never did anything wrong. Well, then you read and you find that, when I read David, I thought, wow, he was as normal could be. So,
In a bad way.
yeah, in a bad way. But also in a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
But
That's
see,
right.
to be relevant, I think a sermon needs to address what's going on in your life, like our present situation, the economy, fear.
Yeah.
People are afraid. COVID has just scared the wits out of people.
But fear engenders control, right? Somebody tries to take control in the midst of your fear, whether it's the shot or it's war or economy or food shortages, whatever you want to name. And so somebody's always trying to take control. And what becomes irrelevant is when we just bring a happy tune and we clap together and we look for there's something deep within us that needs God to save us, right?
Right.
So church becomes irrelevant when we don't deal with the reality.
And I can't get over that because, yes, Brian.
Well, another thing too is it's what they teach in school with some of these kids. They teach anti-church, anti-religion, anti-God because we have so many cultures that mix together that now everybody is. And I don't disagree with having the right to have freedoms, but you shouldn't also impose it on someone else to where they can't worship their God. Like we used to have a moment of silence where we could pray in school.
No more.
They took that out of school. Mm-hmm. They took, they're trying to take God out of the Pledge of Allegiance to America, to the flag.
Right.
They're trying to take God Bless America out of everything. They're trying to take the Star Spangled Banner out of everything. I mean, they're trying to.
The pendulum is swung way over to the left.
Oh, yes.
And when we start teaching these kids at that age that God's not important, that it's sports that are important, that, you know, you being in this club is important, this, you know, going
time
here is important. It's not sitting down at the dinner table and, you know, let's talk about God. It doesn't start at home, so it's not going to follow through into them coming to church.
So I work out at a CrossFit, not affiliated CrossFit gym, but it's a CrossFit gym in the area, and I go pretty faithfully. I'm pretty faithful to go, I'd say 4 times a week. I'd like to go 5 times a week, but man, it's hard. And I'll be honest, we are together so regularly. There's probably 10 of us in there that come 20 of us total, but give or take a few characters, it's just like church. And it becomes relevant because for me, it's either, to be completely honest, it is a place where I get all of I can sit there like therapy and just work through all of the things in my head that are stirred up and scrambled up. It's where I take it's like a moment of prayer, a moment of it's like, you know, farmers go out to work, and work helps them process their emotions, their issues. And for me, that's the way it is. But I have to be honest, there are people in that gym whom I know more intimately than I know people in my congregation. And I should know that. That's really for me, that's really scathing because I'm the pastor. But it's because there's intimacy. There is when you live with someone or live life with someone for over a period of time, you begin to understand them, and they begin to trust you, and there becomes a collaboration. That's real.
Well,
so church is irrelevant if we're not together.
Well, look how much me, you, and Joe and Kelly, how close we are. And I mean, Boyd was in that mix too before he passed on. You know, we know each other well enough that we can look at somebody and say, "Look, you're having a problem. What's going on?"
Right. Well, and then you have to give them license to say, you know, your shirt smells today. Like you have to be confident with that. You love the person, that you can say something that's critical.
Oh yeah.
As my children, when they looked at our podcast, they critique it every week. And one week they said, "Dad, you've got to do something with the way you look." I said, "What do you mean?" Said, "Well, you and Brian are like y'all were going to the beach, and the preacher like he was preaching, and y'all got to do something about that."
Well, I had a funeral that day. In your defense,
anyway, see, you laugh at me, but that's why church is so real to me. God lives in the left-hand corner
of the historic
sanctuary, right up there in the corner. I have sat in that pew. I cannot tell you. I did it Sunday. Something's on my mind. I used to think it was the only hour during my week when my name was not called. It was either Daddy or Joe or Mr. Deloach or you need to do this or it was an hour where nobody said anything to me. Mm-hmm. And see, I'm like you. I used to go to the gym, but COVID shut it down. So now I use it at home. Right. Have an hour every morning. I want the TV on. I put the news on just so some noise. But it's an hour where you process stuff. Mm-hmm. When I quit going to church, and I think we all have spells of that, it never felt right. Mm-hmm. It's like the time flowed all together. Sunday morning starts the week. Mm-hmm. Maybe starts and stops the previous week. To me, that just sort of started the week off right.
But if church isn't authentic, if church is like your corner, your corner, your corner, your corner, and we don't come together, then church does become irrelevant.
Well, see, that was the last thing. Churches are not providing a sense of community.
Mm-hmm. And see, we have a community, but and not trying to say anything bad about our church, but we had division in our church too between the two congregations.
Well, there's theological divisions. There's congregational.
Oh, and don't forget
stylistic.
Division.
Right.
There's you can count. You can look. You can find division wherever you're looking. You know, right. There's lake versus lake. There's lake versus town.
And see, that there is a side of the whole community thing. Because if we can't come together as one congregation and be a unified unit to do God's mission, then I hate to say this way, but we fail as a church. Mm-hmm. Because God wants us to all be one church, one faith, one baptism, one Christ. Right. Not, well, I'm 8:45 and I'm 11 o'clock.
It is different though. You can appreciate. I can appreciate as a newbie, being here two and a half years, almost 2.5 years, that the folks on the lake have a different context. I mean, these folks most of them are retired. They served as teachers, doctors, lawyers, businessmen and women, all across metropolitan areas.
Different set of, I call it, they come with a different bag of rocks altogether.
Right. Some of them come from Macon, which is a very different place than Atlanta. Some of them come from Augusta, which is a very different place than Macon or Atlanta. And then they come together and they sort of become sort of their own subgroup, right? Lake Oconee, Lake Sinclair. But then you have town folks. But then you have, I've come to find out with Joe, there are country folks. There are town and country, and you have historical mill people, and you have historical sort of town folks that were working in banks and shopkeepers and shop owners. Like it's a woo. And it's all.
You used the word silo one time.
Yeah, it's a silo. It's a multiple.
Our whole community is a bunch of silos.
And these phones.
I got a comment I need to read.
Boy, these phones will make you siloed even more.
Yeah. What's the comment, Brian?
This is from Ms. Linda Ralston. It starts at home. The parents must bring or ensure that children understand that God is the center of everything. He has to be number one, not sports, not clubs, or anything else. If other children see this, they will bring their friends and it will grow.
Yeah. We didn't
That's
even
right.
bring up sports, though.
No, I did.
That's a touchy subject.
I brought it up.
But I mean, I look at, like, I turn the news on, and of course, you know, and it's football season and all that, and I admire somebody that enjoys that.
Sure.
I don't.
Right.
Don't ask why. I guess because
Yeah.
I grew up hating it because I was no good at it.
Well, it's,
You know, and
it's like I'm not good at tennis, so I don't watch
I
it.
was the butt of all the jokes forever. Couldn't see. Put somebody on the football field to catch a ball that you can't see till it gets right in front of your face. I mean,
Right.
you know. So anyway,
Well, same. Well, yeah, everybody's got their strengths, and everybody's got their sort of blind spots, and we just don't. We're happier culturally. I think we're happier to deal with our strengths than we are our blind spots. And when we get vulnerable, that's when church gets relevant.
in me, finding a sense of community in this church comes from working in the church.
That's right.
I mean, to me, I never will forget. I sat there one Mother's Day. I've forgotten who the minister was now. He was going on about some sermon, and I had a good friend, Martha Mixon, lived across the street, and we had lunch with her afterwards. We walked over there, and I was sitting over there on her porch, very pontifically talking about how terrible the sermon was, and it sucked, and blah 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 blah. I don't understand this church. And she looked at me. She said, "Well, you know, if you feel that strongly, why don't you get up off your and go over there and do something about it?"
Right.
I did. That's when you all of a sudden, I call it ownership. You feel like you own part of it. 845, it is so nice. There are a lot of people there that I don't know
Sure.
because I just don't know them.
Right.
But we speak, we're friendly, and that's the way it should be. And I feel a sense of community there. But again, God is so real. He lives in that left-hand corner. He's there all the time. Sometimes during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, when I work and I come over here, I'll go and sit in there.
At our best, we are. A few weeks ago, we had an ice cream social. The men during the month of August, various groups brought people together. But that fifth Sunday in August was perfect because we had ice cream social, and everybody likes ice cream, or at least if you don't, you probably have lactose intolerance or something. But
They make a pill
it's
for
not
that.
because
It's got lactate.
it's not because it doesn't taste good. It's just because you physically can't do it. But to see both congregations coming together, now obviously there were probably 15 people less because it was not at 8:45, and so there are folks that are just not going to come because they have other things at 11. But the point is, to see our church as one. I saw it at homecoming right before COVID. When Robin Lindsay came back, and there was probably 250 people eating fried chicken.
Yeah.
Man, but it's at its worst. We sit. I and some of us on staff will go to the 8:45 service and see great, and then go to the 11 o'clock service and see pretty good too. But neither of the two shall mix, and it's like, oh, I'm serving two churches with two personalities. So
Two different congregations.
so that becomes confusing to the outsider, right? That's a really hard to contemplate.
Well, that's what me and you sat down and talked about a couple of days ago. Was it's almost like two churches on one campus, because
If we're not careful, that's what it becomes.
and the thing is we have two of the same services, so it also confuses them. Why are you having two traditional services when you can do it all at one place? Why not mix it up and do
Right.
a different style service to kind of fill that, to give a variety of difference?
All of these reasons were given when the church grew, exploded, when Lindsay was here. And one Sunday he preached on this, and he said, if we move to 2 services, you're going to lose a lot. Case in point, somebody runs into somebody and they said, "Oh, well, why don't you come go to church with me?" And this person looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I go to First Methodist." They said, "Well, I do too." One went to 8:45, one went to 11. They never saw each other. Didn't even know they were in
And
the same.
therein is where church becomes irrelevant.
That's it right there.
Yep.
That's it.
And ultimately, God is present, but God, the touch points are where we find God. You know, we find God, and usually it happens in our Sunday school classes, or our small groups, or our gatherings like this at a table, when we're eating supper, eating lunch together. But we miss those, and I think it's easy for. This is where I think church becomes irrelevant. And it's not just this congregation, but in general, is that we find ourselves in we have places, touch points where we find intimacy with God, but we don't have the door. We naturally sort of close in because it's comfortable for us. Like my wife and I, we talk. That's where we have those conversations. Well, it's different when you're married, but on the other hand, in a Sunday school, if you don't have a Sunday school, you walk in and you come to a Sunday school, well, there's already 8 people in there that have a Sunday school. Yeah. And are they going to be able to talk about their tragedies, their humorous moments in their week, the good things that are happening in their life to someone who they don't know? And the answer is probably no. And really,
it's called trust.
And John Wesley said, like, we need to create and form small groups and class groups, because people coming in can't jump into the boat and swim, or jump into the water and swim as fast as you. So we got to start. We got to remember that the outsider doesn't understand this.
And see, I
Or
think
the young folks.
the reason that youth, teenagers, and whatever, don't find church as being relevant is because their parents don't find it as relevant. Mm-hmm. As my wife and I, God was real. So our children went to church. Right. We wanted them to experience. Well, if I didn't know that, no, let's don't go. We'll find something else, blah, 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 blah. And that's what we're dealing with. We have raised a generation of people who do not think God's real. Yet, what's the first thing they say when bad times hit? Who's the first thing they call on? Oh, yeah. God.
Yeah, help me. God help me.
Yeah.
3 first words. God help me.
Right out of their mouth.
I got another comment I got to read. It's from Miss Linda also. Actually, it's 2. It says, it shouldn't matter what background or profession, labor, town, country you come from. We all come from the same place, and hopefully we're going to the same place. But
Amen
when we come
that.
to church, we should be on equal ground and leave everything else at home and join to worship our one God. Mm-hmm. And then about what I said about, the division is, amen, Brian, we need to all be together.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's right.
I mean, you think, well, I don't know the answer to the 2 services other than you have a church big enough for all of them.
Sure.
But then again, now we have different wants and needs. There's a part of the congregation that wants contemporary. I have no problem with that. I like traditional. It's just what you like.
Sure. Well, you can go to Indian Springs, across the way, over in Flo Villa, and it's got its own culture. And it's hard sometimes for an outsider, because I consider myself an outsider to Indian Springs, though I love going there because there's a lot of touch points for me. I went to Asbury Seminary, and Asbury College is always represented there. So it's a holiness campground, and I went to a holiness seminary in the same little small town in the middle of nowhere. But what I find is even I, who spent 3 years in Wilmore, am not connected into that campground. And they used to have thousands of people come to know Jesus, and hundreds of people over the course of 100 and some odd years that have answered a call to ministry. And there's still a relevant place of where God moves. But I can see how hard it has to be to walk into a church, because the cultures are always different at every place.
That's right.
And it's hard to pierce through the culture.
And especially in a church that has the word first in front of it.
Absolutely. Well, there's already a couple of bricks that you got to cross over to get into the threshold of that church.
The common person would think first means, well, they're stuck up or they're snobbish or they don't think I'm good enough.
My accent's not going to be good enough for them.
I'm not going to have on the right.
They're going to read liturgically. I don't read very well.
But I'll go ahead and tell you, I've been to churches where they require you wear a suit and tie every Sunday, no matter what. And you can't come in unless you wear a suit and tie. And I don't always work in the sound. I don't wear shirt and tie because it'll get messed up. But before that, I never really felt comfortable wearing a shirt and tie, anyways, because it felt like it was choking me out.
Right.
And there are some people that can't afford dress clothes.
Sure.
Are we going to deny them the right to come to
We
church?
better not.
No.
But I have to. So First Church, small town, southern. I went to Methodist church. I feel most comfortable wearing that robe and stole. I'm just full confession. I feel most comfortable wearing. I don't wear it, but wearing a bow tie and a robe and stole. That's just where I'm telling you, and I don't do that. But I honestly feel more comfortable, mostly because I feel like I look better in it than I would if I was just wearing a t-shirt. But the point is, sometimes I have to get out. I always have to get out of my own skin, out of my own comfort zone.
See, I was taught you don't have to have a coat and tie on, you don't have the very best.
That's
but
right.
my mom used to say, when you dress for church, it's a sign of respect
It is
for God.
It's giving Him your best, the best of what you have.
And she believed that. She would flip out if she knew I went to church without socks on.
But that doesn't really connect in 21 or 2021. I don't think
We've
it's
lost
wrong.
that.
It's not wrong.
No, but we've lost this. Well, we've lost sense of respect. I deal with youth who have no respect for anything, but let me feel good.
But why would you have reverence for something that's irrelevant to you? It's like, if you don't really understand that's a police officer when you get pulled over and he has the authority to arrest you, then maybe you just say, "Hey, buddy, what's up?"
They don't have they have no sense of reality with God. This is just something you talk about. Just it's not real. He's not really my life. He's not going to help me, and that's sad.
Well, think of it this way. They're taught in school. You can see that it's real.
Yeah.
You can't see God. Is it real?
Well, see, you can't see God, and I think you can see evidence of God.
But see, the evidence they're looking for is tangible, hard evidence. Not just you saying, God did something for me. They want a hard evidence they can pinpoint and say, a lot of
This is
stuff
God.
is science-based.
Well, I think we've run out of time. We try to keep this to half an hour.
Well, we made it halfway through the first one.
I think we've touched the chord, at least with us. Can we talk about this next week?
Yes.
Can we keep talking about this?
Oh
for
yeah,
for at least a couple
hypocritical
weeks?
moral failure. God is missing.
Yeah. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed this. I certainly did. And if we're too raw, just tell us, hey, settle down over there, and we'll do our very best. God bless you. Hope you're having a good day, and we love you.